Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of December. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with two towns in Russia, with Ryazan region, Ryazan town, and Saratov town. Or to be more precise, a small town that's located on the south or on the another bank of Volga River in Engels. These two towns. As you can see, there are two icons. The first one is above the airport that located in Engels. As you can see, there are a lot of aircrafts in this area. That shows that this is a very important military airport. And another attack took place in Ryazan, another airport, and another attack. Later, somewhere at noontime, we got more updates about the situation, and now we know that these two airports were attacked by the Ukrainians. They sent their drones. By this evening, some sources are saying that Ukrainians sent old Soviet drones in these directions. And as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians deal some damage to Russian strategic aircrafts. So those aircrafts that are able to carry nuclear weapon. A lot of talks, a lot of screams we got during the day from the Russian military expert channels. They were saying that how is it possible that Ukrainians are able to cross the distance around 1,000 kilometers and to attack the Russian nuclear strategic aircraft. It's impossible. How could that happen, and so on. If we take a look at the Western sources map and if we try to calculate the distance, let's say from Kharkiv area to Saratov, it's around 700 kilometers. And let's say if we try to calculate the distance between Saratov and not Saratov but Ryazan, and let's say Sumsky region, it's around 400 kilometers. So as you can see, the distance to Moscow is around 400 kilometers. So that means that Ukrainians have weapon or drones that they are able to send on the territory of Russian Federation and that they are able to use, let's say, in Moscow. So it's a very interesting situation, and a lot of people, I believe, are very upset about the fact that there is some kind of balagan in this situation, and that the Ukrainians are able to cross around 1,000 kilometers and attack Russian airports where the Russians are keeping their nuclear strategic aircrafts. It's like sometimes it's hard to believe in this situation, but it's true. The Russians during right now, before I started recording this video, the Russian published some kind of report about the situation, and they told that the Ukrainians were trying to block the upcoming attack from the Russian side. As you know, during the day the Russians sent around 100 missiles or rockets on the territory of Ukraine. They attacked the objects of energy facilities, the military objects, the military warehouses, military bases, and so on. The Russians reported that they were planning to go to attack around 17 targets, and all those targets were attacked successfully. The Ukrainians reported during the day that the Russians sent around 100 rockets. So as you can see, and today we got a lot of updates from the Ukrainian side that they managed to shut down some number of Russian rockets. And the most important thing about this attack, that we saw during the day, that I expected, at least during the day, I expected much more damage from the Russian side. But as you can see, there are a lot of towns, a lot of reports that comes from all over the Ukraine. And we'll see, if we're talking about energy facilities, that the Russians couldn't damage a lot the Ukrainian energy facilities. Later, a lot of Russian military experts reported about another targets, not just about energy facilities. And today, more and more military experts concluded that today the main Russian goal was not to attack the energy facilities, but to attack military objects on the territory of Ukraine. And they were attacking a lot of objects in Zaporozhye, Dnepr, Kryvyi Rog, in Odessa, Nikolaev, in Kharkiv, Poltava, Kremenchuk. If you take a look at this map, you're going to see that there are no icons on the western part of Ukraine, like Lvov, Ternopil, Kovel, Cerny. There are no icons at all, so the Russians even haven't attacked this area. And if you compare this attack with the previous one, this one wasn't so powerful as we saw during the previous two waves of attack. And some Russian military experts are saying that the Russians changed the quality or type of targets during these missiles attacks. And most of the Russian experts are saying that this situation is connected with the fact that the Russians during the previous months, during the November and October, managed to deploy a lot of very important, a lot of very interesting satellites in the space. And to tell the truth, some Russian military experts were saying that as soon as when the special operation started in Ukraine, the Russians found out that there are no satellites in the space that were able to follow and to get information from the ground in Ukraine as the Ukrainians have and as the Western countries have. So if we will describe this in a simple manner, we can say that the Russians didn't have any satellites above the Ukraine at all. Of course, they had some GPS or analog GPS satellites, something like this. But to tell the truth, and it's not like something that's secret, a lot of Western experts were saying as well that the Russians didn't have any possibilities to see the situation on the ground. Like online in this special military operation. Also, the Russians didn't have internet connection as the Ukrainians had with help of Elon Musk's Starlink satellite system. Also, the Russians had a lot of problems with communication and so on. So during November and October, the Russians were trying to solve this issue. And to tell the truth, they sent a lot of satellites during these months. I can't tell you the exact number of those satellites, but I saw a lot of reports. I believe that something more than even 10 satellites were sent during these months with one purpose: to see the situation on the ground in Ukraine, to provide information online, to prepare, to establish, to provide stable connection and internet to the forces located on the ground, and to do everything that Ukrainians, or to provide the Russian Air Army everything that Ukrainians had or received from the Western countries, like Starlink internet, like connection, and like observing the situation on the ground online. So that was the purposes. And as soon as the Russians achieved the real picture on the ground, in online mode, in online situation, of course, from that for a moment they were able to follow and to spot the Ukrainian armies, the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian forces, the accumulation of Ukrainian forces, the plants and industrial zones where the Ukrainians were fixing or creating some equipments for their army. And after that, the Russians changed their target. And today we was the witnesses of the situation when the Russians stopped attacking energy facilities, but they were mainly concentrated over the industrial zones. And we saw this same situation. We started following this situation, or see the situation, maybe somewhere at the end of November, because the latest satellite that the Russians deployed, this process took place on the 28th of November, so something around a week ago. And a lot of Russian military experts are saying that from that very moment, the damage that Ukrainians received from the Russians was increased. And mainly, as I told you, the Russians attacks from now on in industrial zones, plants, some accumulation of forces, and so on. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground. One more thing about today's attack. If I understand the situation correct, from the reports we received, just a few regions in Ukraine were cut off from the electricity. I'm talking about Sumy region, and maybe it was some kind of Kremenchuk region or something like this. Most of the towns, there were some cuts off from electricity, but I believe that by this evening or by this night, everything will be restored, and the civilians will be able to live a regular life or something like this. If we're talking about the situation on the ground, there are very heavy clashes all along the front lines, as usual. If we're talking about Kupiansk front line, there is, as you can see, the Ukrainians were trying to attack in the same directions. The Russians attacked the Ukrainians in the town by the name of Tabaevka. This one, Tabaevka, they were planning to accumulate some forces. Maybe after that, they were planning to attack in the direction of Vladimirovka. Anyway, the Russians attacked these forces, and they killed the losses of Ukrainians around 65 soldiers, something like 4 armored vehicles. they couldn't even start this offensive operation, and they were forced to stretch and to run away from this position. If we're talking about Liman, the same story. The Ukrainians were attacking in direction of Zhitlovka, Chervonopopovka. There are very heavy clashes on this line. These territories in the gray zone, and it's very difficult to understand who has initiative in this area. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukraine lost around 60 soldiers and something around 8 armored vehicles. As you can see, the Ukrainians were trying to send some commandos in Dergi and some scouts in direction of Svatova, but the Russians reported that they managed to destroy those scouts groups, but without the providing of the number of that forces. If we're talking about Bakhmut Sever's front line, the situation is very difficult. Clashes are very high in this area. The Western sources are saying that the Ukrainians are losing up to 1 battalion per day, so we can say that, of course, there are different numbers of soldiers in different types of battalions, but we can say that Ukrainians loses around 300/800 soldiers per day on Bakhmut front line. A lot of Western military experts are saying that Bakhmut is a very big trap for the Ukrainians, because it's very difficult to step back and to retreat from Bakhmut and not to allow the entire front line to collapse. So the only options for the Ukrainians is to fight and try to reduce the Russians as much as possible, and even in this case the Ukrainians have more losses than the Russians. If we're talking about new directions of attack, today we got the first update that the Russians were attacking from Mayorsk, from this area, Zaryanovka, Mayorsk, in direction of Druzhba. Today they were saying that there were heavy clashes near Shumy. This is fortification that located between Druzhba, Mayorsk and Gorlovka. So the Russians activated in this area. It's the situation that we discussed many times about New York attack in direction of New York agglomeration. So the Russians were trying to attack somewhere in this area from Mayorsk towards these positions. The Russians couldn't achieve any success, just like some data that we need to discuss. If we're talking about Bakhmut, there are no changes. Just the Russians were saying that there were very heavy clashes in Solidar, Bakhmutska, Yakovlevka, Bilogorovka. Today the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukraine's defense orders in this area, and they told that they managed to enter or to establish some control over some positions near Yakovlevka and to get deeper inside of Bilogorovka, because, as you know, some part of Bilogorovka is already in the Russian control. Yakovlevka, the Russians didn't have any positions in Yakovlevka, but today there was a report that the Russians got two positions, 2 checkpoints of Ukrainians in the vicinity of Yakovlevka, and 3 another checkpoints in the vicinity of Bilogorovka, of DPR Bilogorovka, because there is another Bilogorovka on the north, this one, and the situation there is stable. The Russians made few attempts to take control of this town, but all those attempts were repulsed by the Russians. If we're talking about Donetsk front line today, the Ukrainians lost around 70 soldiers and something around 10 armored vehicles. If we're talking about South Donetsk area, there are no updates, no changes. There are very heavy clashes in Marinka, as you can see. The Ukrainians were attacking this area, were trying to return control over the lost positions in the middle part of Marinka, but all those attacks were repulsed. The same situation in the south. The Ukrainians were trying to attack in direction of Nikolska from Vodyane and Ugledar, but those attacks were repulsed as well, and the Ukrainians lost around 30 soldiers and something around 4 armored vehicles during those clashes. Few helicopters were shot down during the previous days. Few aircrafts like MiG-29 and MiG-25 Su-25 were shot down during the previous 24 hours. The Russians during the previous days attacked heavily Kramatorsk. During the previous week and this week we got a lot of updates about the fact that the Russians destroy few warehouses, few plants, and few bases of some forces in this area. But for now, as you can see, the front lines are stable. There are very heavy clashes. It's very hot there, but there are no movements. Right now, these days, these hours, both armies do just one job. They're trying to reduce the enemy's forces, and they're trying to save their soldiers as much as possible. And I believe that this situation we're going to see for the next 2 weeks, or maybe a week and a half or something like this. I don't think that this week we are going to see some updates on the ground. I will be very impressed and surprised if anybody will be able to take something on the front lines. I'm not sure it's even possible because of big number of forces all over the front lines from both sides. I believe that tomorrow we are going to see more updates about these explosions on the Ukraine, because from now on, for now, if we're talking about energy facilities, we can say that the Russians deal no damage to the energy facility. They attack few energy stations or something like this, but those attacks wasn't so important. And we still haven't received any updates from the Russians about the industrial zones they attack. There was an important update that the Russians attack, as I believe in Zaporozhye, a small plant that Ukrainians were used to fix the energy facilities parts. So this is very important. From now on, we can say that it's very difficult for the Ukrainians to fix or to repair their parts for energy facilities or something like this. But to tell the truth, for now, like this attack for today, at least this attack didn't impress me as the previous one impressed me. So I can't say that this attack during the day was very successful. For now, I don't see this. Yes, we see that the Russians do a lot of damage, a lot of icons, but I can't say that all those attacks were very successful and that the Russians achieved significant success as they achieved during the previous attack against the energy facilities when the entire Ukraine were shut down and there were a few days without any electricity or something like this. So let's follow. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my page, and have a good day. Bye bye.